just a small portion.
Getting barrels is pretty much like, that is all I pursue.
For me, I'm drawn to the challenge that surfing brings to me.
Just realized how good that feeling was, and I was like, I just want to keep doing that. Pursue your thrill. Smith Optics.
Did you know you can AFK Bloods and Zaya whilst learning to code in Python? Go to boot.dev.
It became clear that this was the work of someone who was deeply unwell. Some of his notes hinted at the possibility of him being a World War II veteran, which could explain the origin of his mental illness. However, that wasn't what started his fascination with aliens and extraterrestrial life forms. Some of the earliest documents in the box were from 1937, with some of the newest ones dating to 1977. In other words, Daniel remained fixated on this topic for over 4 decades. However, his earlier work was a lot tamer and more legible than whatever he came up with in his later years, hinting at his deteriorating mental health. As for the actual contents of this box, however, one particular topic stood out above the rest: his account of the incident that happened on July 7th, 1977. According to Daniel, Tampa Bay was hit by a tornado on that day, but that tornado was just to disguise alien ships used to make contact with Earth without getting spotted. He created several detailed illustrations of what he saw that day, and it's bizarre to say the least. In reality, there were no records of a tornado or any other extreme weather event happening in Tampa Bay on the 7th of July. That said, Daniel didn't choose this day at random. You see, a lot of Daniel's illustrations of the 7th of July include this same building as the center point for alien descent. This was the inverted pyramid on the St. Petersburg Pier in Tampa. Coincidentally, this building was also lit up with a massive laser light show installation on July 7th, 1977. So it's highly likely that Daniel witnessed this laser show, misinterpreted it as an alien encounter, and then spiraled into an obsession to document what he genuinely believed was a life-changing event. And the craziest part is, this was only a fraction of the work he'd produced in his lifetime. This is because, as the story gained traction online, a Reddit user named That's My Box came forward, claiming that she was the previous owner of the wooden box Tram Stop Dan found. And apparently she was telling the truth. She moved into a new home in the 90s where she found a room full of Daniel's work. This included a chair-like machine he'd constructed, which, according to his notes, was the device he'd used for an out-of-body experience and time travel. Unfortunately, most of Daniel's stuff had to be thrown out, which is how Tram Stop Dan found the box. It really makes you wonder what other mind-bending contraptions, bizarre concepts, or odd events he might have noted down on paper during his lifetime. Eritas. On November 5th, 2015, an anonymous user posted a thread on 4chan talking about a strange conversation they had with a girl at work. The girl he talked with was, at the time, homeless and in a band. She also worked for a really shady company that was in the process of closing down. One day, her supervisors gave her and another employee 2 tape guns and instructed them to pack boxes. However, the tape in one of these guns had the word Eritas written on it. When she inquired about this word, her coworker told her to get rid of the tape gun and to not mention the word to any of the supervisors. Apparently, he used to work in IT, and one of his jobs was to flag employees who searched this term so they could be fired. The OP was curious about what Eritas meant. However, this was also the first time other 4chan users had encountered the word, so they couldn't offer much help in figuring out what it meant either. But then a month later, on December 19th, another anonymous user brought up Eritas again, hinting that it was some HR-related computer program. But this time the OP received an answer, which defined Eritas as a program that allows some specific third-party company unconditional access to employee information. This reply also mentioned major brands like UPS, Unilever, and Ecolab. About 1 more month later, on January 25th, a user on the music board talked about wanting to make music from obscure YouTube videos. They also included a list of video links they were interested in. The second of these links led to a video titled "YouTube is monitoring and controlling my life" that was posted just 2 days before the 4chan post. The owner of the channel that posted this video, Chronos for Life Jurassic Park, believed that he was being targeted by Eritas. This, along with a now-deleted Q&A video Chronos posted later, gave people a clearer picture of Eritas' true nature. Eritas, as many came to understand it, was a mass surveillance and censorship software allegedly used by powerful entities to securely monitor the public. What made Eritas so terrifyingly effective was its ability to erase its own existence. It would detect any time someone mentioned it across the internet and remove that reference without a trace. Chronos even posted a video titled "Here Goes Nothing" as bait for Eritas, hoping the advanced algorithm would target and delete the video, thereby proving it was real. But that wasn't all. Turning on captions revealed that the video also had hidden messages at several points throughout its runtime. Decoding these messages led to a fake address that was listed on the profile of a band called KFC Murder Chicks. This band featured homeless girls, and surprisingly, one of them reportedly worked in a warehouse, just like the mysterious girl who told the first 4chan user about Eritas. Looking further into this band revealed a YouTube upload of one of their songs which had the word Eritas in its description as well. The channel that uploaded this video, Todd Ellsworth, also had a relatively empty Twitter account with the word. The only noteworthy post on this account was this creepy, elongated portrait of a man. By this point, many people who were following the mystery assumed that Todd and the KFC Chicks band had something to do with Eritas. Or at least they knew something about this advanced algorithm that no one else did. But when asked about it, they denied having any knowledge about the term. Unfortunately, that's where the lead stopped. Users had so much information and connection points between various groups and people, but it led to nowhere. This left Eritas as just another unsolved mystery of the internet. That is until August 2020, when a YouTuber called Toxicologist managed to get an interview with a person named DJ Roswell. As it turned out, Roswell was behind everything from the very beginning. He was the leader of the KFC Murder Chicks band and wanted to promote his band with an ARG. So he was the one who created the lore surrounding Eritas and every puzzle piece connecting to it. As for this unsettling image, this turned out to just be a police sketch of a horrible criminal from Hawaii that had nothing to do with the band or the ARG. Roswell just used this picture because it was attention-grabbing. Unfortunately for Roswell, people weren't able to progress through the storyline fast enough, and many lost interest over time, giving a tragically mundane ending to the mystery of Eritas.
Capacitor course check is okay.
Alan Tutorial. In June 2011, a YouTube channel called Alan Tutorial uploaded its first video called How to Leak on a Piece of Paper. This 1 minute and 15-second video didn't make any logical sense and was just a jumbled mess of random actions.
You rip off a piece of paper and you're gonna put the paper on the floor. Next thing.
Gas mask. On the 19th of September 2017, an anonymous 4chan user posted a picture of a gas mask, 2 bottles of vinegar, and a jug of bleach, captioned, "About to test out this gas mask." While some brushed it off, thinking that the OP was just messing around, a few showed genuine curiosity and egged on the OP to continue his experiment. Okay, post results if you live. However, this curiosity turned into concern when the OP returned with an update 20 minutes later, stating, "What could go wrong? We'll report." Alongside this, he posted a picture of the vinegar being poured into a mysterious yellow substance, which looked shockingly similar to concentrated chlorine gas. For those who don't know, chlorine gas is a deadly war chemical that was used by the German army during the First World War. More importantly, the only chemicals needed to synthesize this dangerous gas are bleach and vinegar, the exact materials OP had with him. The OP either didn't know about the gas or seriously underestimated its danger. Unfortunately, by the time he realized the gravity of his situation, it was already too late. Because just a few minutes later, he returned with a disturbing update. "Holy, it hurts. Might have to go to the hospital." This also included a picture that showed his arm developing blisters and turning an alarming shade of red. These symptoms matched perfectly with known signs of chlorine gas exposure, sparking immediate concern for the safety of OP and anyone in his vicinity. "You fool, that will burn your skin and soak into your surroundings. Legit question, please tell me you don't have an apartment/pets or roommates. Depending on your mixture, you just messed up big time. Let's say you made only 4 ounces of gas. That comes out to 29,962 parts per million. Concentrations of about 400 parts per million and above are generally fatal over 30 minutes, and at 1,000 parts per million and above, fatality ensues within only a few minutes. Dude, go vent yourself somewhere and literally bathe with a garden hose. You are going to melt otherwise. It acts on flesh, not just on breathing pathways. It melts flesh, which makes people drown in their own melted lungs, but your arms can get messed up too." While the other users were panicking, the OP made 2 other posts, each showing his arm in increasingly worse condition. "It's starting to peel and fall off, still hurts," with his last reply simply stating, "Goodbye." After posting this update, the OP vanished from the thread, leading many to believe that he might have actually passed away due to this experiment gone wrong. Some even claimed the incident had taken the lives of several of his neighbors. However, despite extensive searching, I wasn't able to find any news reports mentioning such a gruesome incident. If something of this magnitude had actually happened, it would have definitely made headlines. More importantly, I couldn't find a single credible source confirming just the OP's death either. In other words, we don't know what happened to him after his last post. The lack of any news coverage could suggest that the OP may have survived the chlorine gas exposure, possibly after calling emergency services and being rushed to the hospital. But that's highly unlikely. Even in moderate concentration, chlorine gas can end someone's life in minutes. Yet the OP kept posting about his worsening state for over 30 minutes after creating the deadly chemical. Which brings us to the other possibility, that this whole thing was completely fake from the beginning. To some viewers, the peeling skin on his arm looks suspiciously like makeup, or at most some well-done special effects. A now deleted user on Reddit even added a personal anecdote to back this theory, stating, "I have a face mask exfoliator that goes on wet and looks pretty much the same as Anon's skin in the first pic, and peels off like the following pics. See how the skin is peeling off and shows regular skin underneath? If he was actually burned, the skin underneath would look red and or bleeding. He probably just grabbed one of his girlfriend's exfoliators and slapped it on because it looked red enough to fool people." If the whole thing was staged, it would also explain some of the strange behavior I noticed from the OP. Things like, why did he stay in the bathroom with the hazardous gas for so long instead of rushing out immediately? And how was he able to endure the excruciating pain he must have been in, all while taking perfectly framed, still pictures of his arm? However, despite all the signs suggesting it was a complete hoax, there's still no definitive way to know for sure. Maybe one day a news article will be found that announced the OP's death, or perhaps the OP will come forward and reveal the truth. Until then, the gas mask incident remains one of the most disturbing threads in 4chan history.
This is your brain when you're struggling to focus. And this is your brain when you're in the zone. But getting in the zone and staying.
Bank robber. On August 20, 2015, a 4chan user posted his plans to rob a bank later that day, stating, "Okay, today is the day. I'm going to walk into the bank at 3 p.m. with sunglasses, a hat, a sweater, a BB gun, and this note. I'll get out, dump the sweater and BB gun, and ride out on my bike back to the hotel. I'm serious. Wish me luck." Alongside this was a picture of a handwritten note that he planned to hand over to the bank teller, stating things like, "I want $5,000, $150 bills only, and I have a gun in my jacket." However, threads like these aren't anything new on 4chan. More often than not, it's just some anonymous user who's bored, trolling, or desperate for attention. So, despite the OP's insistence on being serious about his plans, this one seemed no different. One user even recognized the OP from a previous thread where he talked about robbing the bank for $20,000 instead. To make matters worse, the OP didn't use a VPN before, allowing someone to trace his approximate location back to Jacksonville. By this point, most users saw the OP as nothing more than a clueless wannabe. However, while everyone was making fun of him, the OP did what no one expected. He followed through with his plans, setting off a manhunt that would last for weeks. It started with him showing off the BB gun he brought to the robbery and getting drunk to calm his nerves. From there, he stayed active in the thread and kept everyone updated on his whereabouts. He also ditched anonymity and began posting under the Anon Dump username so others could follow his updates more easily. Minutes before the planned time, he posted about someone stealing his bike, which he was going to use for the robbery, before going completely silent. This led many to believe that the plan was cancelled, but around 25 minutes later, Anon Dump returned with images of the money he stole along with a detailed description of what he did and what he was doing next. However, while he saw himself as a master description of later, Anon Dump returned with images of the money he stole along with a detailed description of what he did and what he was doing next. Images of the money he stole along with a detailed description of what he did and what he was doing next. However, while he saw himself as a master criminal, the police weren't far behind. His hat and glasses did little to hide his identity, allowing investigators to plaster his face across news networks. They also put a $3,000 reward for any information that could lead to his arrest. This left the OP fearing for his life as the gravity of his actions began to sink in. "Hey guys, guy who robbed the bank here. My face is on the news and there's a $3,000 reward for tips leading to my capture. I'm scared. Robbing a bank wasn't worth it at all. I have like $4,800 left. I'm scared of leaving the hotel. I want to get out of here, but somebody may see me. I'm trapped. And this fear was justified. He was now a fugitive who was being actively pursued by the police. On top of that, he also had a BB gun on him, which looked like a real gun at first glance. If the officers barged into his hotel room and saw this gun nearby, there was a real possibility he could lose his life over a relatively small amount. Despite his growing fear, he continued updating everyone on 4chan about his whereabouts until the 21st of August around 3 p.m. when, after hiding in a hotel room for nearly 24 hours, he managed to escape the city and vanish from the thread. Now, it's unclear what happened next, but based the city and vanished when, after hiding in a hotel room for nearly 24 hours, he managed to escape the city and vanish from the thread. Now, it's unclear what happened next, but based on what I've seen, it's likely the investigators were already monitoring his updates on 4chan, and his post about taking a cab from the hotel gave them the lead they needed to track him down. On September 2nd, 2015, authorities arrested 26-year-old Pedro Smith, aka Anon Dump, about 70 miles from the crime scene in Gainesville. He was charged with armed robbery and faced a minimum of 10 years in prison. However, after a trial in September, he was sentenced to only 3 years in prison, which didn't make sense to some people on the internet. How did he get away with such a light sentence after robbing a bank and hiding from the police for so many days? A few people looked into his whereabouts after his release in March of 2018 and discovered that he was living in a luxurious home worth over $1.5 million in Miami. This pointed to the possibility that he had wealthy parents who could also afford top-tier lawyers to help reduce his sentence. In other words, the only reason Pedro had for robbing a bank and potentially risking his life was to gain the attention and approval of other users on 4chan. Thing. Turns out, even the more trustworthy right now, this is sponsored one, but continue real tell even in a red being a thread and couple depicts guy. Behind them is what looks like the remains of a young child in a red jacket lying face down on the grass. Unfortunately, no one on 4chan had any clue what the OP was talking about either. One user did claim to have seen a similar image back in the 2000s when they first started using 4chan, but they didn't provide any further information. The contents of the image also divided the community in two. Some speculated that this was the trophy photo the two men took after ending a life. They look like hunters posing with a fresh kill, while others weren't so convinced. I feel like this might just be some kind of photo shoot. You know, like a bunch of kids hanging out and they decided why not take some pictures, which led them to taking this picture just for them to show it around on the internet for shock or something. Which begs the question, what is this really? I tried searching for answers myself, however information surrounding this image is surprisingly hard to come by. For starters, the OP mentioned an iceberg chart thread in their post, but never provided the link or even the name of the thread. Looking at the image itself, there's not much we can gather from it either. There are no visible landmarks or even stars in the sky that could help us pinpoint the location where the image was taken. The only clue we have is the name, the Monon Tunnels, referring to the tiny town called Monon, Indiana. But even that's not much help, since the town is littered with hundreds of flat grass patches that could have served as the backdrop for this image. The camera noise makes it near impossible to estimate the year this image was taken based on the image quality as well. And there wasn't any useful information in its embedded data either. I also couldn't find any exact matches on the internet outside the original 4chan through reverse image searching. However, while looking for similar images, I came across something that could potentially clue us into the origin of this unsettling image. You see, there are two distinct possibilities for what it represents. First is that it was taken by a couple of serial killers as trophy photo proof of their horrible crime. But I wasn't able to find any matching incident that happened in Monon or its surrounding area. Even if the killers were never caught, there would still probably be a report where the victim's description aligns with the person we see in the image. Which leads us into the second, more likely possibility. This was simply a group of friends, and the person lying in the background is actually an adult who likely passed out after a night of drinking. Now, there's no way to know if the disturbing feel of the image was intentional or not, but the possibility of this being a completely harmless picture is fairly high. Reverse image searching it brings up hundreds of similar photos, with people having fun and lying down on a patch of grass at night. That being said, this is nothing more than conjecture on my part, and the reality could be anything. Then there's also the question of how the OP got their hands on this image if it's nowhere else to be found on the internet. Sadly, it's been over 7 years since the original thread, meaning it's unlikely we'll ever uncover the truth. spoon and duct tape experiment. On the 9th of April 2010, an anonymous 4chan user posted a fun science experiment for others to try. The instructions were as follows. Go to your kitchen and find a nice metal spoon. Teaspoons work too, but normal ones are better. Get yourself a lighter. The bigger the flame, the better. Get some duct tape and wrap it around the handle, about 4 to 6 layers. Start heating up the spoon with the lighter. Make it really hot. Holding it just above the flame for about 2 minutes should work. Go to a faucet and turn on cold water at full force. Hold the spoon directly under the faucet. Post results. At first glance, this experiment looked like it had something to do with steam. Maybe pressing the hot spoon under the faucet would instantly vaporize the water, filling the room with a sudden burst of steam or fog, something along those lines. When, in reality, the results were much worse. Whoever thought of this wicked experiment did so with the intention of hurting people, and unfortunately their plan worked better than they could have expected. Within the first hour of the thread going live, nearly a dozen people had injured themselves attempting to follow the instructions. I thought, hey, what could go wrong, and I tried it. At first it steamed in my face like crazy, and then the spoon started ticking and split into 3 parts, one shooting through a plate, one through a cut, and the last barely missed me. I don't believe this, so I thought I would try this, expecting something cool would happen, like a lot of smoke. But instead, I got a shrapnel spoon. It nearly exploded in my hand and shards went off in all directions, causing me to take cover. This nearly cost me my life. I'm not coming here again. OP, why? I covered my face expecting steam. My hands are bleeding so much it hurts. No one do this. Extreme cooling causes metals to burst. Now, 4chan is no stranger to causing widespread harm with these cool experiments, like the one I covered in my previous 4chan video. However, this one stood out for just how dangerously destructive it was. It used extremely common household items like duct tape and a spoon. And because it didn't involve any chemicals, people were far less cautious about just how dangerous it could be. According to one explanation, heating the spoon causes the inner layers of the tape to become extremely hot, almost to the point of melting, while the outer layers remain cool enough to still touch. Then, as the hot spoon comes under cold water, it quickly cools down. But since the inner tape around the handle is still scorching hot, it causes extreme temperature and pressure differences within the spoon, causing it to explode, sending shrapnel everywhere. And while the damage on 4chan was already immense, that was only the beginning. From there, this experiment spread like wildfire to other popular forum sites like Newgrounds, claiming even more victims in the process. The only silver lining here is that the spoon and duct tape experiment copy pasta has since faded into obscurity. So, at the very least, it hopefully won't be causing any more injuries. Epileptic attack. Back in 2008, some 4chan users got together and came up with one of the most cruel pranks in the site's history. Now, unfortunately, most of that thread has been lost to time. The only surviving proof I could find was this screenshot detailing what to do, stating, Epileptic forum raid. 1. Make account. 2. Spam flashing gifs, party hard, etc. 3. Troll the user base. 4. Question marks. 5. Profit. Their target was the Epilepsy Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting individuals with epilepsy and helping them find the care they need. After agreeing on a plan, the group of anonymous users headed over to the Foundation's website and exploited a security vulnerability to gain unrestricted access to the support forum. From there, they used a script to post hundreds of messages embedded with flashing animated GIFs with hopes of catching visitors off guard and triggering seizures. Tragically, this was just as effective as they expected. Within seconds of the attack, dozens of users began experiencing intense migraines, with some even suffering full-blown seizures. One of the site's visitors, 33-year-old Rianne Foltz, described her painful experience in a later interview, stating, "It was a spike of pain in my head, and the lockup that only happens with really bad ones. I don't think I've had a seizure like that in about a year." She was just one of many victims that were swept up in what can only be described as a truly evil act. All the while, the 4chan attackers were celebrating their victory, laughing at the victims' pain, and calling the attack incredible and amazing. Fortunately, the Epilepsy Foundation's IT department managed to quickly take control of the situation before it escalated into a widespread crisis. And while I couldn't find any solid proof, a few sources suggest that the attack may have triggered an FBI investigation. Unfortunately, because of 4chan's anonymity, the people responsible for this horrible attack were never identified or held accountable.
Mother Nature absolutely beats us down and teaches us lessons. If it wasn't for that, we'd probably get bored of it. And I think that is kind of pursuing my thrill, like feeds and takes me on the roller coaster of emotions that I want to go on. Pursue your thrill. Smith Optics.
Forget everything you knew about war games. The large-scale action game War Thunder will bring you a
Greenbelt using a chainsaw and machete.
From what I could find online, Rami is originally from New York and struggles with severe mental health issues and violent tendencies. As one local resident described her account with him, stating, "He's very
Today, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one is devastating, where the cave diver became so hopeless with his misery that he ended his nightmare by stabbing himself. You heard that right. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Off the coast of Croatia sits Shulta Island, only 19 kilometers long by 5 kilometers wide. This tiny island is a short ferry ride and an ideal day trip from Split, which is Croatia's second biggest city. It's a hilly island with beautiful pebble beaches and absolutely crystal clear water. It's a very popular tourist destination that's actually famous for its honey, as well as an underwater cave that kills virtually everyone who goes inside. On September 10th, 2002, 31-year-old Miroslav Kukas was enjoying a vacation with friends on Shulta Island. It was a little after 8:30 in the evening when one of his friends suggested they go scuba diving. Because of its beautiful clear waters, Shulta Island is a very popular scuba diving destination, and as such, scuba diving takes place at all hours around the island. The vast majority of diving happens in safe little alcoves where it's not very deep, and you can see fish and wildlife in a very controlled environment. But Miroslav and his friends didn't want to do regular scuba diving. They wanted to check out the underwater cave they had heard about, just south of Shulta Island in Pogan Bay. They had heard this cave was extremely dangerous, and only expert divers were allowed to go in there. Even though they were not expert divers, barely novice divers, they thought, how bad can it be? Let's go check it out for ourselves. So, they convinced one of the boat drivers to take them out to the area in Pogan Bay that sat over where this cave entrance was. They put on their gear, hopped in his boat, drove out, and jumped in the water. Sure enough, right below the surface, about 10 meters down, was this hole on the seafloor, the single entrance into this cave. When you go in this hole, you have to go down head first because it's so tight. Once you go down about 10 meters, you reach this junction where, to one side, it leads to the shallow gallery, which is the space that goes down to 36 meters with no other caves or entrances off of it. It's just kind of like a chasm inside of the cave. From the junction, if you go the other way, it brings you to the deep gallery, which is just a bigger version of the shallow gallery and goes down to 57 meters. Inside the deep gallery, however, at the very top on the ceiling, there is a very thin air pocket. There are several reasons why this cave is so dangerous beyond just being an underwater cave, which in itself is quite dangerous. The first is that visibility inside the cave is basically zero. The only light that comes in is through that single entrance that leads to the junction, but the light doesn't make it past the junction into the two galleries. So it is truly pitch black inside those galleries. You also have all the silt that's caked to the inside of the cave, so as soon as you get in there, your flippers and your movement kick the silt off the wall and muddy the water around you. Even if you had a flashlight, it's like driving in fog. The lights only pick up the fog right in front of you. You can't see beyond the fog. In a tunnel, you shine your light on silt, and you're just going to see the silt, not beyond it. So basically, going into this cave, you're going to be blindfolded. A little after 9:15 p.m., Miroslav goes in first, followed by his other two friends. Miroslav reaches the junction, and he turns towards the deep gallery. He goes all the way down to 57 meters, touches the bottom, turns around, and starts making his ascent. On the way up, he gets to the junction and makes the critical mistake of going into the shallow gallery, believing that is the exit of the cave. He probably got in there, bumped his head, started feeling around. He's kicking up silt, he's starting to panic, he's looking for the way out. Again, he finds the exit to the junction, but instead of taking the exit out of the cave,
make your browser fast. Make your browser safe.
He makes the same mistake again and goes into the deep gallery. Now he's in the deep gallery, feeling around, running low on air. Based on his dive computer, he was fumbling around in there for quite some time. At some point, Miroslav must have looked at his air gauge and realized, I'm out of air now, and he made one last push to try to get to the surface, but he hit a ceiling. That's when he realized, based on maybe the touch and feel, maybe he took his gloves off and was feeling around. He felt that he was in the air pocket, that thin amount of air that sat right at the top of the deep gallery. He must have realized at this point that there was so little air here that he probably only had a few minutes before he was going to drown. In terms of making his ascent to the surface on a single breath, Miroslav's only hope was the air pocket in the deep gallery. He likely knew the cave well enough to remember this. In his mind, he was probably estimating his depth, 40, maybe 50 meters beneath the surface, and realizing just how little oxygen he had left in his lungs. Every second, his chest was tightening. The crushing pressure of the water and the mounting carbon dioxide in his system would have been pushing his body into panic. He couldn't stay where he was, and he couldn't make the journey upward without blacking out. The thought of drowning, thrashing helplessly as water filled his lungs, was becoming inevitable. Faced with that terrifying certainty, he made a decision no diver ever wants to consider. With the clarity that sometimes comes in the final moments, Miroslav reached for the dive knife strapped to his gear. He gripped it, steeled himself, and drove it into his chest, piercing his heart. It was quick. Later, when authorities performed his autopsy, it would confirm the unthinkable truth. Miroslav did not drown. He had died by his own hand, choosing it over the slow agony of suffocation. Back on the surface, the two other divers in his group had already exited the cave system without issue. They were in the boat, waiting, scanning the surface of the water for signs of Miroslav. Time ticked by, 10 minutes, 20, then 30. After over an hour had passed with no sign of him, their concern turned to fear. They called the police, who responded quickly and sent 2 trained cave divers into the submerged tunnel system to search for Miroslav. One of those divers was 25-year-old Oliver Mirage, a capable and physically fit professional, but not yet experienced with this particular cave's notorious layout. He and his partner descended into the dark, narrow corridors, their lights cutting through the silty water as they searched for any sign of Miroslav. But the cave was a labyrinth, and visibility was poor. With time and oxygen running low, they prepared to abort the mission and ascend. But as they made their way out, Oliver misjudged the route, just like Miroslav had before him, and became disoriented in the network of underwater chambers. Specifically, he became trapped in the shallow gallery, a deceptive area that leads many divers to think they're close to escape. His partner had made the same mistake briefly, but had managed to reverse course and find the correct exit path. Oliver, however, was not so fortunate. He went back and forth in desperation between the deep gallery and the shallow gallery, trying to orient himself, but every wrong turn brought him closer to exhaustion. In the end, he couldn't find his way out. His tank ran dry, and Oliver Mirage drowned in the same cave where Miroslav had died just hours before. It would take the police 3 long days to locate and recover both Miroslav and Oliver from the twisted passages of that cave. By then, the story had made headlines, and the site gained a grim reputation. Even today, local authorities actively warn divers to stay away from this cave unless they have extensive experience with deep, technical diving and the mental discipline to handle extreme stress. Despite the warnings, year after year, reckless or overconfident divers still try to test their luck. And tragically, many make the same fatal mistakes, misjudging the galleries, running out of air, and becoming yet another name in a growing list of victims claimed by the cave. This next story is about a caver who got lost in a maze, and then things went from bad to worse. On December 31st, 1990, near Santa Rita Mountains, Kevin Sears and his friend were heading towards another adventure. At 21 years old, with several caves already explored, they felt confident about their return to Agua Caliente Cave on the last day of the year. The limestone formation, nestled in the western foothills south of Tucson, Arizona, had beckoned them back to explore its deeper passages. The weather was chilly, but both young men wore only jeans and short-sleeved shirts, anticipating the constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 22 degrees Celsius temperature that awaited them underground. Their tennis shoes, though lacking the ankle support of the proper caving boots, had served them well enough on previous adventures. Each carried a
Concentrate fire on the target. Enemy battleship sunk.
flashlight, their only source of light. Wrapped around Kevin's shoulder hung 50 feet, about 15 meters, of half-inch polypropylene rope, essential for descending the vertical shaft, known among cave explorers as the loop pit. Neither wore helmets, despite the low ceilings and protruding rock formations that made head protection standard practice among experienced spelunkers. At 11 a.m., they ducked through the upper entrance, a narrow opening in the hillside barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. The passageway narrowed in places, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees over rough stone that scraped their unprotected limbs. Kevin and his friend had no formal map, but relied on memory from their previous exploration when they had traversed the Loop, a circular route through the cave system, in the counterclockwise direction as far as the White Sand Room, a chamber named for its unusual floor of pale, fine sediment that resembled a miniature beach. Today they would attempt the clockwise route, planning to complete the full loop and exit through the lower entrance without needing to climb back up the way they came. 8 minutes of careful movement brought them to the loop pit, a vertical shaft dropping 40 feet, approximately 12 meters, to the lower level of the cave. They secured their rope to a natural anchor point, a sturdy rock protrusion, and performed a quick check by tugging firmly on it. With their rigging complete, they began their descent one at a time. Without proper rappelling gear, specialized equipment used cave explorers to control their descent on a rope. They lowered themselves hand over hand, a technique that requires considerable upper body strength and carries significant risk if the climber loses their grip. With the loop pit conquered, they continued their clockwise journey through narrow tunnels that occasionally widened into rooms large enough to stand upright. By 1 p.m., they had reached the White Sand Room, a chamber roughly 30 feet across with a ceiling just high enough to stand. The fine, pale sediment crunched beneath their shoes as they swept their flashlights around, searching for the passage they had used during their previous visit. Minutes stretched into a half hour as they explored every crevice and opening they could find. But the familiar route eluded them. The similarity of rock formations and the disorienting nature of underground navigation had confused them. As they ventured deeper, they felt as if they were ending back to the starting point. Everything seemed uncannily similar. The tunnel would narrow down, then widen up into a room, and then this would keep on happening. They started to panic and could feel they were lost. However, the only thing that kept them hopeful was that they were going in one direction only and followed one passage only. Eventually, they were forced to acknowledge defeat. Their plan to complete the loop had failed, meaning they would need to return the way they came, back up the rope at the loop pit. With growing concern about the time, now 1:30 p.m., they retraced their steps. The journey back to the pit took longer than expected as fatigue began to set in. They still didn't know if they were going back to the pit or were actually lost. But they stayed calm and followed their gut. Their flashlights, which had seemed bright upon entry, now appeared dimmer as their batteries gradually depleted. Finally, a sense of relief came in as they were able to recognize the loop pit. Now, all they had to do was climb up and get out. At the base of the loop pit, Kevin prepared for the ascent. Looking up at the distant circle of darkness that marked the upper level, he gripped the rope firmly and began pulling himself upward, hand over hand, foot by foot. He climbed slowly through the darkness. The rough polypropylene fibers bit into his palms as sweat began to make his grip uncertain. Nearly at the top, with muscles burning from exertion, Kevin encountered a section of the pit wall covered in flowstone, a smooth, hard mineral deposit created by water flowing over the surface over thousands of years. His tennis shoes, with their flexible rubber soles now coated in cave dust, found no purchase on the slick surface. For a moment, He hung suspended by the strength in his arms alone. Then his grip failed. The fall lasted only seconds, but time seemed to stretch as Kevin plummeted through the darkness. Instinctively, he wrapped his arms around his head for protection as he crashed onto the cave floor. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, but left him otherwise intact. He was in pain, but after catching his breath and assessing that no serious damage had been done, Kevin approached the rope once more, determined to conquer the obstacle. Again he climbed, arms trembling now with fatigue and the after effects of adrenaline. Again he reached the treacherous flowstone section, and again, despite his careful movements, his feet slipped from beneath him. This time, as he fell, something went terribly wrong. He landed awkwardly. A searing pain exploding through his leg and hip. The cave's dusty floor pressed against his cheek as waves of agony washed over him. Each attempt to stand sent fresh bolts of pain through his body. His femur, the large bone in the upper leg, and possibly his pelvis had fractured from the impact. Immobilized by injury and trapped hundreds of feet from the surface, Kevin faced a cave explorer's nightmare. His friend, realizing the severity of the situation, made the difficult decision to leave Kevin alone while he sought help. The solo ascent up the rope was arduous, but fear and urgency lent him strength. Emerging from the cave into the afternoon sunshine felt surreal after the close darkness below. The nearest telephone lay miles away across rugged terrain. It was nearly 3 p.m. when the emergency call was finally placed, setting in motion the complex machinery of cave rescue. The Southern Arizona Rescue Association, SARA, received notification at 7 p.m., and locals with knowledge of Agua Caliente began arriving at the scene between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. As darkness fell outside, cave rescuers, trained volunteers skilled in the specialized techniques required for underground emergencies, descended into Agua Caliente. They found Kevin conscious but in extreme pain, having lain injured in the complete darkness for hours after his flashlight batteries had failed. The rescue team's first priority was medical assessment and stabilization. They carefully secured Kevin to a backboard to immobilize his spine and potential fractures. An intravenous line was inserted to provide fluids, though no pain medication, food, or water was administered due to the uncertainty of his injuries and the potential need for emergency surgery upon reaching the hospital. Extracting an injured person from a cave presents unique challenges unlike those of surface rescues. The team had to rig 4 separate hauling systems, mechanical advantage setups using ropes and pulleys, to overcome the vertical obstacles between Kevin and the surface. These included the 40-foot loop pit where the accident occurred, the climb into what was called the register room, named for a logbook kept there for visitors to sign, the awkwardly angled beer can slide, and finally the climb out through the lower entrance. Throughout nearly the entire route, Kevin was belayed, secured with safety lines to prevent any further falls, as rescuers painstakingly transported him through narrow passages never designed for human transit, much less for moving an immobilized person on a rigid backboard. At 11:15 p.m., nearly 12 hours after entering the cave, Kevin was hauled upward through the loop pit, where his ordeal had begun. At the top, he was transferred to a Stokes litter, a specialized basket stretcher designed for difficult evacuations, and the slow process continued. As the final minutes of the year ticked away, rescuers worked tirelessly in the confined spaces, communicating through shouts that echoed off limestone walls. The night air held a biting chill when Kevin finally emerged from the lower entrance at 2 a.m. on New Year's Day. Under normal circumstances, the cave's constant temperature would have been comfortably warm compared to the winter night, but hypothermia had become a concern due to Kevin's immobility and the trauma his body had endured. 30 minutes later, Kevin was airlifted to the University Medical Center. There, doctors were surprised to discover that despite the excruciating
Auto insurance all seems the same until it's time to use it. With USAA, it's easy to find.
Today we will be looking at 2 horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular will make you go haywire. A cave's dark, isolated environment is a deadly trap for someone struggling with depression, and that's what happened with this caver, who wandered aimlessly through the underground maze for 34 excruciating days, pushing him to the brink of death. The second narrative follows a similar pattern. As always, viewer discretion is advised. The evening of December 18th, 2004, settled quietly over the hamlet of Madiran in southwestern France. Jean-Luc Josuat Vergès, a 48-year-old caretaker at a local health center, left his home without saying much to his wife and 14-year-old son. Depression had been his constant companion for months, wrapping around his thoughts like a dark fog. He climbed into his Land Rover, tucking a bottle of whiskey and a pocket full of sleeping pills into his jacket, and drove up into the limestone hills that overlooked the village. As twilight faded into darkness, Jean-Luc steered his vehicle toward the gaping entrance of an abandoned mushroom farm built into underground caves. He sat for a moment in the silence, then clicked on his flashlight and stepped out, leaving the driver's door open behind him. He stumbled forward, carrying whiskey in one hand, into the underground caverns, an endless tunnel leading to underground caves. The abandoned farm wasn't simply a single cavern, but a sprawling underground labyrinth. Originally excavated as a chalk mine, the tunnel stretched for approximately 8 kilometers, 5 miles beneath the hills. A disorienting maze of blind corridors, twisting passages, and dead ends carved into the limestone. Jean-Luc walked deeper into the darkness, turning left, then right, with no particular destination in mind. Without a map or any guidance system, he was completely lost within minutes. The underground tunnels were so identical in their appearance that, when he tried to turn back, he had no way of knowing if he was retracing his steps or venturing deeper into the maze. Within hours, the batteries in his flashlight began to fail. The beam grew dimmer with each passing minute until it finally sputtered out, plunging him into absolute darkness. Without light, Jean-Luc's sense of direction immediately vanished. He continued forward, hands outstretched, feeling his way along the cold, damp walls. The ground beneath his feet grew increasingly soggy as he progressed through one particularly muddy corridor. The earth became a thick morass that clung to his shoes, creating a powerful suction. When he attempted to take another step, both shoes were pulled completely off his feet, swallowed by the mud with a soft, imperceptible sound. Now barefoot, Jean-Luc continued to stumble through the absolute darkness. The temperature in the caves remained a constant 12 degrees Celsius, 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cool enough to be uncomfortable for a man without proper clothing or shelter. His fingers trailed along the rough limestone walls as he searched for any hint of the exit. Each corridor led to another, identical in their darkness, indistinguishable in their twists and turns. Jean-Luc frequently thought he recognized a particular bend or texture in the wall, believing he had returned to a previous location, only to discover he was in yet another unfamiliar section of the maze. This false familiarity was cruelly deceiving. While he believed he might be circling back toward the entrance, he was actually venturing deeper into the bowels of the underground network. During those first 24 hours, Jean-Luc's initial confusion transformed into rising panic. The human hippocampus, that primitive region of the brain, equipped with millions of neurons designed to create cognitive maps of our surroundings, was rendered useless in the absolute darkness. Without visual cues or landmarks, his brain's navigation equipment failed completely. His sense of time began to distort as well. With no daylight to mark the passing of hours, the feeling of being hopelessly lost intensified with each step. What made his situation particularly maddening was the sensation that he was traveling in circles, yet every attempt to course correct only seemed to lead him deeper into the underground labyrinth. By the third day, hunger and thirst became Jean-Luc's primary concerns. His whiskey was gone, and he had never swallowed the sleeping pills. Desperately thirsty, he discovered that water occasionally dripped from the limestone ceiling. He positioned himself beneath these natural faucets, catching precious drops on his tongue. When the dripping was too slow, he pressed his mouth directly against the cave walls, sucking moisture from the porous stone. His stomach cramped with emptiness. After nearly a week underground, Jean-Luc began to adapt to his circumstances. Crawling on all fours through the darkness, he pawed at the ground like an animal, finding...
Make your browser fast. Make your browser safe. Make your browser Chrome. Choose Google Chrome for your computer.